Measuring land and land use. In this review, we'll focus on the land. We'll look at 3 methods of legal description that may be used to identify a specific parcel of land. We'll briefly discuss how land may be measured, and then look at ways in which a landowner's use of their land may be impacted by the government or through private restrictions. A legal description of property is necessary to identify and distinguish that property from all other parcels of land. Legal descriptions identify the boundaries and location of the parcel. They do not describe the improvements to the land. While street names may change, which would change the property's address, a parcel's legal description does not change. Legal descriptions may also appear in mortgages, title insurance policies, appraisals, leases, or purchase. The 3 most common types of legal description are the lot and block system, the meets and bounds system, and the government survey system, also called the rectangular survey system. The meets and bounds system is a complex legal description that is used to define the location, size, and shape of a specific parcel of land, one of the oldest methods of describing property. Meets and bounds was imported to the 13 original colonies from England and is most typically used in states along the eastern seaboard. With the meets and bounds system, the surveyor finds the point of beginning of the closest corner of the property. The description continues by indicating a compass direction and the distance to define the boundaries of the parcel, moving clockwise around each side of the entire parcel until ultimately returning to the point of beginning, closing the perimeter of the parcel. The rectangular survey system, sometimes referred to as the government survey system, was originally established by the Continental Congress in 1785 to deal with the sale and settlement of large tracts of land. It divides land into a grid using a series of meridians and baselines. North-south lines are called range lines, and east-west lines are called township lines. North-south strips are called ranges, and east-west strips are called tiers. These divide land into 6-mile square townships. Each township is subdivided into 36 sections of 640 acres. Parcels within sections are described by directions and fractional quadrants. Due to the curvature of the earth, correction lines occur every 4th tier, or 24 miles. The lot and block system describes platted property, such as properties in a subdivision. A plat map shows lot and block numbers and is usually recorded in the public records of the county where the land is located. Note that a survey is not the same thing as a legal description. It is the formal process of locating and measuring the boundaries of a property and identifying the improvements, encroachments, and easements that are associated with that land. Elevation is a property's vertical measurement above or below a fixed reference point, most commonly sea level. A topographic map shows the elevation of a particular section of land. Let's briefly discuss land measurement. As a real estate professional, you will likely need to do area calculations sometimes. For instance, you may find some properties that list the square footage of a bedroom, while others just provide dimensions, or perhaps the dimensions of a lot are listed, but your client wants to know the square footage or the size in acres. Area measurement provides the square footage of a parcel of land, the living area of the house, or the size of a room. To find the area of a square or rectangle, multiply the width by the length. To find the area of a triangle, multiply half of the base measurement by the height. Houses tend to be a collection of many shapes, so the total square footage can be determined by separating the house into multiple rectangles and triangles, calculating the square footage for each shape, then adding them together. When calculating square footage for residential property, licensees generally measure from the exterior finished surface of the outside wall inward, distinguishing between finished and unfinished areas of the property and between above grade and below grade areas to determine the gross living area or livable area. Linear measurements determine the length of something. Most often, this will be in the form of a perimeter, which is the length around something. Front feet, or frontage, is the dimension across the access side of a parcel of land, such as a road, railroad tracks, or water. When referring to lot size, the frontage is the first number. Commercial land is more likely to be sold as a dollar amount per front foot than by square footage. And here's a number you simply must memorize: there are 43,560 square feet in an acre. To find the acreage of a parcel, calculate the square footage, then divide by 43,560. Now let's turn our attention to ways in which a property owner's title may be challenged. Land ownership can be absolute, meaning the complete bundle of rights belongs to the owner. Generally speaking, owners have the right to use, enjoy, dispose of, and possess property. However, this does not necessarily mean landowners have the absolute right to use and enjoy the land. How can this be? Restrictions are sometimes placed on the land by the government, private companies, and even individuals who have interests in the property. Let's start by discussing the government's 4 primary interests in real property, which can be remembered with the acronym PEAT: police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. Police power is the constitutional authority of federal, state, and local governments, and sometimes public utilities and railroads, to enact and enforce laws that protect the public's health, safety, morals, and general welfare. The most common examples of the government's police power are zoning ordinances, building codes, subdivision regulations, and environmental. Earlier, we mentioned eminent domain. Let's review. 2 conditions must be met before the government can exercise its power of eminent domain and take private property. 1. The condemned property is being taken for the use and benefit of the public. And 2. The property owner is paid just compensation for the property taken, which is usually its market value. Remember that residential tenants whose property is condemned before the end of their lease term are entitled to receive relocation assistance. The T in PEAT is taxation, the government's power to levy charges to fund services. For example, property taxes, also known as ad valorem taxes, are imposed on property owners by state and local governments to pay for schools, improvements, or other public needs. Special assessments are taxes levied only against properties that benefit from a public improvement, such as a new sewer line. Special assessment taxes are not permanent. Once the property owner's contribution to the cost of the benefit is paid, the tax ceases. We also mentioned escheat earlier. Under the government's power of escheat, when a person dies intestate, that is, without a will, and has no heirs or creditors, title to property reverts to the state. Abandoned property also escheats. Building codes are an example of the government's police powers. They protect the public by setting minimum standards and requiring builders to use certain construction standards, including particular methods and materials, sanitary equipment, electrical wiring, and fire prevention techniques. The Federal Emergency Management Agency creates flood maps for every U.S. city and county with minimum construction requirements for local building codes. Landowners must obtain building permits before constructing or renovating residential or commercial property. A permit may also be required to destroy or modify an existing property. Certificates of use and occupancy are issued to builders after all inspections have been made, and the property is deemed fit for occupancy. Local government entities generally have a planning board. Their comprehensive plan, or master plan, considers factors that impact area growth, such as infrastructure, public transportation, schools, and environmental concerns. The planning board also evaluates subdivision proposals. A site plan or plat describes buildings and utilities, the configuration of streets and sidewalks, and zoning. Environmental impact statements describe potential impact to air and water quality, solid waste disposal, traffic, school enrollment, energy consumption, wildlife, etc. Zoning ordinances are laws adopted by local governments that divide a city or county into areas with different classifications for use. Zoning ordinances regulate lot size, building height, building setbacks, front feet, the density of the area, and buffer zones. Zoning is an appurtenance, which means it runs with the land when property is sold. Zoning is typically enforced through building or occupancy permits or the courts. A non-conforming use occurs when land use does not conform to current zoning laws but is legally allowed because the land use was established before the new zoning laws were enacted. Most non-conforming uses are allowed to continue but may not be expanded or enlarged. A variance is a form of administrative relief that allows property to be used in a way that does not comply with the literal requirements of the zoning ordinance. Cluster zoning allows developers to provide a varied selection of lot sizes and housing choices within a single area. Cluster zoning often takes the form of a plan unit development, which is a special type of subdivision allowed in some communities that does not comply with standard zoning and subdivision regulations. Rezoning is a revision in zoning law, usually changing a zone from one type to another. It is not a variance or exception. Spot zoning is usually illegal because it benefits or restricts individual properties within a zone. As mentioned, environmental laws are also an exercise of the government's police power. Real estate licensees should be aware of potential environmental concerns with property so they can advise their clients and tenants, ensure they are complying with any required disclosures, and understand how environmental issues can impact property values. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency enforces laws and regulations to protect the environment. For example, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, referred to as CERCLA, created the Superfund, which is a trust fund used to clean up severe hazardous waste sites or sites where no responsible party could be identified. Underground storage tanks that store gasoline, chemicals, and hazardous waste can threaten human health and the environment if they leak, contaminating soil and groundwater. Brownfields are properties whose expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substances. Buyers can protect themselves from potential liabilities by having an environmental site assessment, which can have up to 4 phases: Phase 1, investigation; Phase 2, testing; Phase 3, remediation; and Phase 4, management. Wetlands are ecosystems where the land is permeated with water, which either lies on or near the surface of the land. Benefits include preventing flood damage, natural filtration, and habitats for wildlife and aquatic species. State agencies generally have the authority to protect wetlands by limiting activities or requiring permits. The Federal Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act requires sellers, real estate licensees, property managers, and landlords to disclose known paint hazards for homes built before 1978. Sellers must provide reports from any previous tests. Sellers, landlords, and licensees must give prospective residents a brochure about lead paint hazards. Buyers have 10 days to conduct lead testing if they choose, but sellers are not required to test for or remove lead paint or other lead hazards. Now let's briefly discuss some other specific hazards. Asbestos is a heat-resistant material once used as insulation and other building materials. It is particularly dangerous when friable and crumbling particles are inhaled. Removal of asbestos requires EPA-licensed contractors. Urea formaldehyde foam is an insulation that can emit toxic fumes. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas that can get into homes through cracks and build up to dangerous levels if not prevented. Mold is a fungus that can grow anywhere and on any organic material. Methamphetamine is an illegal drug whose manufacturer creates toxic residue. Remember, as a real estate licensee, you are not required to be a technical expert regarding environmental issues such as underground storage tanks, mold, radon, or asbestos. You do, however, need to be knowledgeable about potential internal and external hazards. It's critical to recognize red flags and to disclose any known or suspected issues. So far, we've focused on ways the government can impact land use, but a property owner's use and enjoyment of their land can also be limited by private deed restrictions, also known as restrictive covenants. These are restrictions or conditions found in a deed or subdivision. Regulations. Owners' associations usually impose a declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, known as C.C. and RS, to maintain the uniform character and value of the properties. These run with the land and could last in perpetuity if they relate to the use, maintenance, or improvement of real property. Any deed restriction that is reasonable and lawful can generally be enforced by the grantor or other property owners under the same restriction by seeking a court injunction to stop or remove the violation. Deed restrictions may not violate the law in any way and cannot be so restrictive as to prevent the free and reasonable transfer of the property. They may be terminated by setting a termination date, releasing the owner, abandoning the property, or changing the property and/or owner circumstances. When a deed restriction and zoning law differ, the more restrictive use prevails. To make a restriction enforceable against third parties, it must be recorded. Once a covenant is in the chain of title in the public records, future buyers take title subject to the restriction, even if it is not stated in the deed. That concludes this review on measuring land and land use. We discussed the 3 different methods of legal descriptions. Remember that a legal description, which uniquely describes a specific parcel of land, is generally required in a deed used to transfer title. We also discussed ways in which the government and private entities can impact a property owner's title, use, and enjoyment of their land.